Hi Year 11 and welcome to the night before news for your Paper 2 Sociology exam. On the next slide you'll find a reminder of all of the things that could come up in the exam tomorrow, but obviously bear in mind I have given you a number of revision materials today and on Arbor which should direct you to some more specific areas of revision. Paper 2 is focused on social stratification and crime and deviance, and there will also be a short section on research methods. Flashcards are obviously a very common research method, and you hopefully have quite a number based on the mini-mock we did in class earlier this term. At the very least, please make sure you have created flashcards and are revising those flashcards for the terms that are in front of you on the screen now. Make sure you have them with you tomorrow and keep revising them. Make sure you have the definitions and you also have an example to back up the definition. This is the retrieval grid that we worked on in class. These are the answers that are completed. Again, please use this to revise. Make sure if you're not sure what any of the things mean, look up your answers, add a little bit more detail. Again, have this with you tomorrow to revise before you go into the exam. So the paper itself, you have sat an example of this paper earlier this term. You'll have a range of 2 and 4 mark questions throughout the paper. Many of these will ask for a definition. If the question asks for a definition, you also need to provide an example as well. A way in which you could scaffold your answer would be to make a point, which is the definition, and then develop it by giving an example. So if a question asks what is meant by wealth, you give a definition of what is meant by wealth and then an example relating back to the possessions that somebody might have, such as land, jewellery or housing. If a question asks for 2 examples or reasons or factors, you just need to do the above twice. Make sure you give 2 answers if it asks for 2 on a 4 mark question. As always on a longer mark question, on the 8 mark questions, you'll be asked to give 2 different explanations for something. You can see that you get marks for AO1 and AO2 on this 8 mark question. To get into that top band, you need to have a coherent answer, which means you need to be thinking about what you're writing before you start writing. You need to give 2 ways that something occurs, and in this way, it's 2 ways in which social class and crime are linked. So if you were going to answer this question, you might want to consider blue-collar crime, which is the crime committed by the working class, and why working class people might commit crimes such as robbery. And also you might consider white-collar crime, which are crimes committed by the middle class, such as embezzlement and tax fraud. And you might want to consider why those types of crimes are committed by the middle class. You can see that you ideally need to use key terms and that you offer a full explanation for your reasons. There are no marks for AO3 here, so you do not need to evaluate the different points of view. On the exam paper, there are 3 9-mark questions. And again, you have to provide at least 2 different viewpoints in relation to a question. So for example, the question might be why class inequality exists. So why are some people rich and some people poor is basically what this question is asking you. Class is in relation to social class, so you might talk about the underclass, the working class, the middle class and the upper class. You might refer to proletariat and bourgeoisie. So if you're going to answer this question as to why class inequality exists, you might choose to take a functionalist viewpoint, which links the idea of class inequality back to meritocracy. They would say that people who are middle class and upper class are people who work hard and are talented and deserve their position in society, whereas someone like Charles Murray, who's a new right thinker, might say that people are poor and in the underclass because they are too reliant on the welfare state and they are lazy. You could compare this with a Marxist view who says that actually society is set up to benefit those in the middle and upper classes, and it is that system of stratification that keeps the poor in the positions that they are. So they would be 2 different viewpoints as to why class inequality exists. Marxists think that it is unfair, functionalists think that it is fair. To get the highest marks, you also need to evaluate these views. So what are the strengths and weaknesses of the different lines of argument? What could you do to back up a functionalist viewpoint or a new right viewpoint? Or what could you do to challenge a Marxist viewpoint? Ideally, you should also provide examples to support the points of view that you are making. Finally, you need to reach a judgment as to which view you think is the most valid. You should reach judgment, as I've said. You might want to do this in your introduction, in your first couple of sentences, so that you don't forget to do it at the end. So don't forget, give a judgment. Which viewpoint do you think is best? Here is a short activity you could carry out on what the different sociological perspectives think about crime. Remember, Marxists think that society is unfair, and they see that the upper class or the elite cause lower classes to commit crime due to inequality. Feminists look at links between gender and crime, and functionalists look at how crime could be useful for society, and also the purpose that crime serves. Have a read of the paragraph as well, which gives you an example of how you could write a paragraph in relation to this question. You will find the answers on the next slide. You'll have one 15-mark question on your exam paper. Please don't be scared by it. It's very similar in structure to the other questions. You can see though that there are a lot of marks here for AO3, Assessment Objective 3, which is based on evaluation and analysis. This means that, as always on a longer mark question, you have to give at least 2 different points of view. In giving those points of view, again, you have to show analysis and evaluation. I've given you an example of how you might structure it on the left-hand side. Again, try and make it refer back to different sociological perspectives. So, for example, if we were looking at the causes of crime, we might think about what Marxists think cause crime. Look back at the work you completed in class today, your revision clocks and your retrieval grid from earlier. You want to tell me what Marxists think about crime. So Marxists think that crime is caused by capitalism. This means that they think that people are encouraged to value material possessions, and therefore they may commit crimes in order to achieve the same level of wealth that the upper classes have. You would then go on to tell me evidence to support and evidence to contradict the Marxist view. And then you're going to make a judgment in that same paragraph as to how convincing you think the Marxist view is. You would then repeat for at least one other viewpoint, giving me different perspectives on the Marxist view of crime. At the very end, you're going to reach a conclusion that answers the question. And finally, at the end of the section, you're going to have 3 questions about research methods. You're going to be given a particular scenario, and you will have to choose which research method you would use to research that particular event if you were a sociologist, and you'll have to explain why. Some of the research methods you might choose to use could be covert observation, which, as we remember, is hidden observation, and you could say covert participant observation, where you get involved with the group. You could also look at unstructured interviews, where you go in as a sociologist and you let the person speaking almost lead the interview. You let them talk freely and you make notes on what they're saying. You would then need to tell me what the strengths and weaknesses are of those different research methods. You can see here some of the key words that you might include in your answer. So we might say the research method is valid. That means it's something that is accurate and that we can trust. So the 2 research methods I talked about, covert observation and unstructured interviews, are both valid because as the sociologist, we don't interrupt the participants. If we're doing covert observation, we just notice what is happening around us. We don't stop people doing it. And unstructured interviews, we don't restrict the answers that people give. Have a read through the rest and think about the methods you might talk about and include in your answer.